Hello, friends. Welcome to the After Hours Lounge. Welcome back if you are a regular listener. My name is Sandy. I am your host. I'm sorry, it's been a couple of weeks since my last episode. But pretty much if you've been in the UK, or for my listeners in the UK, you will know that we were hit by a pollen bomb. We had some real bad pollen everywhere. My hay fever was really bad. And I thought, actually, the last thing you listeners are going to want to listen to is me snotting all over a microphone, which I'm going to try not to do today. It's not too bad. But yeah, I am joined by fellow kind of, I suppose, Instagram mental health advocate, all that kind of thing. I'm not sure what else, but there's definitely a kind of community of us now. Was put in touch with this person through my very good friend, Alex Bruce. Regular listeners of the podcast will know him. He's a regular guest on as well. An eco warrior and one of my best friends. But yeah, put me on too. Well, the Bookish Mindset is what I knew you as for ages, but now I know you as Nikki Jones. Nikki, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much as well. It's a pleasure.
No, yeah, we've kind of been talking about this for a little while and sort of making it happen. Then you messaged me sort of saying, actually, I've actually listened to the podcast now because you joined our Instagram lives and stuff over lockdown at the start of the year. And it's kind of been a long time coming. And you were like, I think, some stuff to say. And obviously, Ed from A Need to Read as well, who I've had on the podcast, who does some kind of similar stuff to you. So can you, this is the first time we've ever actually met in person. So can you give myself and the listeners a little bit of kind of the who you are, what you do treatment?
Absolutely. So, hi, I'm Nikki. I'm on the South Coast with you, Sandy. So we're all down here. There is a lovely little community. The accent's from up north. So if it gets a little bit dodgy at times, you can't understand, that's fine. Just interrupt me. I started something called the Bookish Mindset during lockdown. It kind of started in November last year, but really kicked off in February. And what the Bookish Mindset is a monthly book subscription box, but with a little bit more. Each month I create a new box, which has a book, 2 gifts from small businesses, and a tea as well, because I love a cup of tea and a book. The books are always bought from my local independent bookshop, Pigeon Books, who I will absolutely mention here if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Because I love them to bits. And the 2 other gifts, they're small businesses. They're all UK based as well. Alex and his straws have been in there as well, which is brilliant. And the tea's actually from Bird and Blends, who are Brighton, so keeping it as close as possible. But I started it. I've always been a reader. I'll put that out there. I know you've had Ed on, and I don't know him personally, but I've listened to his podcast and love that as well. I've always been a reader. I've always been that bookworm. As a kid, just always loved it. I think as a kid, I know you're a Lord of the Rings fan. I always loved Lord of the Rings. I read my mum's old copies that are falling apart.
Yeah.
So I used to read a load of fantasy. From as early as I could read, I was reading far too old, for my age. But and that theme's kind of changed as I've got older. I read different things. But certainly the last year, my friends know that I read a lot, and they'll come to me, ask for recommendations, or if I've read something great, I need to tell everyone about it. I need to tell someone. I need to talk about this book. I read something great. So I'll constantly be telling anyone that will listen, anyone that I know as a reader, oh my God, you need to read this book. And they'll come to me as well, which is great. And that finding books for people that they love ignites some sort of spark in me. That is me at my happiest. If someone comes back to me and go, oh my God, I love that book you recommended. That is brilliant. That just sets my heart alight. So that's sort of one reason it started. The second is sort of through lockdown. I've moved to Portsmouth about 5, 6, 7 years ago, and not long enough to not know a lot of the small businesses around us. And sort of when we could only go out once a day for a walk, I was just sort of finding all these incredible small businesses that were going under awful circumstances, and it was huge sort of inspiration to go, these guys, these businesses are incredible, and they're still going, they're still pushing. And certainly from my point of view, there's so many that I found that I wouldn't have known about necessarily without being part of the community, either from walking around in Southsea or on Instagram, which is huge for things like that. And that kind of combination, and then Pigeon Books opened up, our first independent bookshop in Portsmouth opened up, so they've been going a year now, so they opened up in lockdown. All of that kind of culminated into I could do this kind of stuff, and it kind of very organically grew as that. And then here we are.
Wow, I didn't realize. I thought you'd been doing it for quite a while.
No.
I thought it had been something that you'd, to start a couple of years ago or something. That's really impressive that you only started. I think that's happened a lot, and I've said this on previous podcasts, and it's actually been one of the amazing things to come out of everything horrible that's happened in the last year. But there have been these amazing stories of people being like, oh, do you know what? I've got a real passion for something, and I'm gonna actually try and do something with it, whether it is, like yourself, like I'm going to create an Instagram page, or I'm going to start a podcast, or I'm going to try and start a little, business on the side, whether it's printing t-shirts or books or anything. I think, food, it's been really cool to see people being like, actually, I'm just going to try something. And it doesn't, I think what I talk about a lot is there's two different types of motivation. You've got intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And a lot of people are realizing that intrinsic motivation is more important, which is the motivation of like, you're not doing it because it makes you money or anything like that. You're doing it because it makes you happy.
Totally.
And I think we were so tied before, or many of us were, to being like even if you weren't part of the rat race, you were still like, I need to, I work Monday to Friday, and when I get home, I'm tired. Whereas now, perhaps maybe people working from home, or even when people go back to the office, hopefully they're still going to be like, no, I'm doing an Instagram live on this thing that I've started, or
I couldn't agree more. Yeah,
it's been really, really great to see.
It definitely resonates with me. I'm engineering background, read engineering through uni, did it a master's. That is part of my brain, and that sort of comes across with my lists and the anal organization. I love it. I'm a project manager, and I used to work in cars, and I work in medical. I'm going back to automotive. I absolutely love it. And the stress, I thrive on that stress. And that's an odd thing to say, I realize. It's a special kind of person that says, I love the stress and the pressure. But for me, these boxes, that I need that creative outlet. It was giving me that's so different. And going forward, I don't know how this is going to perform. This is our 5th month, which is exciting that we've got to month 5. But yeah, it's that I'm thinking, well, I always wanted to do engineering the whole of my life, known that's what I want to do. Bang, bang, bang. I was that kind of stubborn, had the 10-year plan. And now I go, hold on, do I really want to do that? I think lockdown allowed a lot of us to slow down and go, is this really what I want? What do I really want out of life? I'm slowing down enough to stop. So yeah.
Yeah, you do. I think it's just, I mean, this may be cliche to say, but it has just hugely changed our perspective. And for me, it's been so awesome. I mean, I oddly made this enormous change to my life in September 2019. I quit my job and redesigned everything, the way I live my life, and was like, right, I'm going to pursue, what I'm doing now. And then 2.5 months later, I started the podcast and stuff. So it's funny that I did it like just before. And it's not like being like, oh, you're all copying me, because it wasn't me. It was the global fucking pandemic. But it's been really cool to see others be like, oh, well, and some of them have even got to the point where they're like, I quit my job and now I do this, full time. And it's been really cool to see. Yeah. Well, clearly you are far too intelligent to be talking to me. So I apologize, Nikki, if you're reading and engineering and all that stuff. But going back to the read, you were always a reader and things like that. It's really interesting because I was as well as a kid. And then I think I, like everyone, got to that point where you're kind of 13 or something, and suddenly reading stops being cool. And you're like, oh. And I wonder what you think about that. And then adding on to that, if that's all right, I mean, this is a long question, but adding on to that, I feel like that happens more in boys than in girls as well. Because reading essentially, I remember as a teenager, or coming into being a teenager, and I was like, I still like, I love reading Lord of the Rings and all this stuff. But I was like, hang on a minute, reading's not cool anymore. And I was like, I need to be, reading's like what? Yeah.
And we get puberty and everything hits. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I just remember I stopped. And then again, another reason why I was really interested to get you on the podcast is it's actually only really been in the last 6 months that I've started to read again. So I've gone from 13 to 29, having not really read any books. Yeah.
Which is totally fine. Let's just say you had life to live in between it. I'm not here to shame people for reading, for not reading, for anything. That is not me. I just like talking about books at any given opportunity. So I've got an interesting perspective on this. I'm probably an anomaly here. So I definitely felt the same. I think there was at some point in a high school, So I'm saying sort of early high school that I definitely stopped reading as much. And there was definitely a point, and I can't think age-wise, where I picked it up again. And then uni for me hit, and uni for me hit, and then you struggle to read anything that's not course related because you feel like you're wasting time. So I think even through uni, I don't think I read that much. But then coming out of uni is a different matter. But I think that hits at 13, at that kind of age, and you're finding you go from primary school, and that's a huge change going to high school. That's massive. You're in a different whole of the world, and puberty, that's going to hit differently. Boys versus girls, that's an interesting one. I was always a little bit tomboy-esque, and you might have guessed that from the engineering. Heavily influenced by my wonderful parents. My parents have always been readers. They were not pushy in terms of you must read. This is it. They're not that kind of parents, but they've always been readers. So I'd see them read, and I was sort of, I guess, influenced by them. I've got younger brothers and sisters who are not readers at all, so it wasn't something that was forced. I will say that. Sorry, Mom. But I've gone off a tangent here. Reading, and so I've read a lot of stuff. I would say is tomboy, more fantasy stuff, definitely. Lord of the Ring, Artemis Fowl. That's one of my favorite things. But then high school hit, and I went to an all-girls school. Simply because it was there in the area, and it was a great school. The boys' school was across the road, but that's a very different school experience than a mixed school as well. And I've got some great friends that I'm still friends with from there, and they would admit it too, it's quite bitchy and it's quite catty, and there is a need to conform. And I'm sure it's the same with guys in all guys school, but I definitely at puberty, high school, I keep saying puberty, I've said puberty far too fucking much. Definitely, I found high school, it's very much there's a need to fit in and a need to conform. And while people might be readers, it's a bit more secretive because it's the nerds and the nerds that get beaten up, not necessarily physically beaten up, but people are excluded. And it was my high school experience was very cliquey. And if you didn't fit in, that was it. You're excluded. It's a funny one, but I don't know about the boys versus girls. I definitely can't comment on that, but I definitely think reading patterns shift.
Yeah.
And I think when I picked it back up, maybe it was sixth form, and there was a little bit of feeling like I could be a bit more myself. And then I started reading a little bit more, but then exams. My reading changed then. I think sort of sixth form, I went more rom-com based again. Right. And then after uni, sort of in life, more rom-com. I've only been sort of reading non-fiction for the last 5 or so years. So I think everything changes as you grow and as you learn. But definitely agree with something hits around high school. I think there's a lot of peer pressure. I think there's a lot of pressure to conform. And
it's kind of like good and bad, isn't it? Because obviously it's not as you said, your whole suddenly of an evening when you're in primary school or whatever, it's not like you can just wander out. And this is me. I grew up in a small town in the Highlands of Scotland where the doors were left unlocked all the time. So it wasn't I was allowed out and stuff, but it's still different to when you're 14 or whatever. And you're like, right, I'm going out with my mates and stuff. You don't do that when you're a younger kid. So, and you have to spend those evenings doing something else. What would be really interesting is to know what young people in 10 years or whatever, what the young people now are going to be like, given that they've got way more distractions. I mean, I don't know how old you are, but because I'm 30 in August. I'm 30 in August. So I mean, when I was, I didn't get a phone until I was 13, and even then it was like a brick Nokia, whatever.
3010i.
I'm
only a couple of years younger, so I just grew up without social media distractions, mostly through primary school and high school.
Exactly. So I didn't have
totally different world.
So I remember one thing I have always carried on doing is reading magazines. And interestingly enough, magazines I've read every time, because I spent many years traveling as well. Every time I got on a plane, I'd buy a magazine. I've always read that. But I remember, I think because I left it a few years, and then when I became an adult, 18, 19 or whatever, and started traveling and things. One, I was traveling and living out of a bag, so I was like, well, I can't bother with a book. And then two, I think I just found it. I looked at them and I was like, it's odd. It's almost intimidating in a way, looking at a book. I think sometimes because you walk into a bookshop, I'm just going to keep using it as at the airport, because that's the only time I ever really looked at books. But I'd go in and you look and you're like, there is 1,000 books in here. And I'm like, what do I want? And it's it's been really difficult. But yeah, I wonder what people are going to be like in it in a few years when they've grown up being able to look at social media and all this, instead of actually sitting and reading Lord of the Rings when they're younger, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, no, totally agree. It'll be very, very interesting to see. But yeah.
It's going to be, especially things like Lord of the Rings and, you know, fantasy things, because that was what really grabbed me. And I'll fully, like, I loved, like, it was the movies first. Like, I saw the Fellowship of the Ring as a 9-10-year-old kid, and I was like, holy shit, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And this is, I grew up when I was 5 years old. Everyone else was doing whatever. I was watching Star Wars. Like, somehow I got Star Wars at a very young age. And then Lord of the Rings, I saw it and I was like, what is this? And then I read the books when I was that age, and I don't think I understood any of it. And then I read them 2 or 3 more times every year after that, because I was like, every year I felt like I was like, oh, I understand a bit more. I understand a bit more.
I love that.
Yeah. So, and then I ended up doing, when I was in sort of 15, 16, I ended up doing my kind of book report thing, whatever, for your GCSEs. I did that on Return of the King.
I love that. I love that so much.
Yeah.
I come back to them so often. I think that's really special.
Well, for me, I've always, and it's something I've said in podcasts previously, I've always been a big one for like escapism and like
Totally
getting out. And for me, that's what I've realized books are for me. And I feel like we're maybe skipping ahead, but actually it's fine. But like what something I said before we hit record, one of the big things I wanted to talk about was the fact that reading, and to a certain extent films as well, but films, especially these days, you can sit on your phone in front of. But reading, it just pulls you into another world and you have to focus. Because if you don't focus, you get half the page down and you go, oh shit, I don't know what's going on. I need to go back.
Totally.
You know, it's not like, it's a completely different experience. And I don't read anymore. I listen to books. So I go for a walk and I do the same thing. But even then, sometimes I'll completely go them out and I'll have to rewind it. Yeah. But that's what it always was for me. And then, I think I just kind of transitioned into movies being that when I became an adult. And then, as I said, it's only in the last year that's done it. I mean, is that a similar experience to you? That kind of escapism and, you know, leaving this world, for lack of a better term.
Totally. I totally agree. Escapism is a huge thing, and I think it's both fiction and non-fiction. It's very easy to say escapism is fiction, especially your fantasy genres, you know, definitely, because it is a whole new world. It forces you to imagine and put yourself in that new world, and you're taking in information and it's completely different. But I think, just to contrast that, I think non-fiction can be totally like that as well. Non-fiction isn't just about education. You can have memoirs, and I don't just mean biographies of celebrities that have been on a couple of shows and done nothing, but memoirs of people that have lived totally different lives from you, lives that you couldn't ever picture yourself in, but they tell it like a story. So that is sometimes just as immersive.
Yeah.
And escapism, and you're totally right, books demand your attention. Yeah. Once you start reading it, especially if it's a good book. Now, granted, there's some god awful things out there, but if it's a good book and it grabs you, you don't want to put it down. And your phone's on silent. You know, you don't want to put it down. They absolutely can demand your attention and keep you from being distracted. And I think also, just skipping points as well, I think that's why reading can be so good for mental health, because it stops you thinking about anything else.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you start thinking about anything else, you're not reading anymore. Yeah. Reading, multitasking isn't really a thing, because you're having to look up from the TV into the book into the TV, and you're not really doing either one. It really grabs you and it stops you doing anything else. I think that's why it can be so good for mental health. For me, I definitely suffered with anxiety a lot through uni, and it's getting better, but it still rears its ugly head.
Right.
And for me, it's sort of an overthinking panic, and reading like consistently. I don't mean like reading all day, because that would be great. But like reading consistently enough that if, 10, 15, half an hour a day, there's time in the day that my brain stops and slows down, and I will get lost in a book. And that by the time I've put the book down for, either to go to bed or to do whatever after, I'm at a slower pace and I can process information better and not overthink and panic. So I think, just to go back, escapism definitely, but I think that's across the board. I definitely started with fantasy because of that, because it was exciting as a kid. Your imagination is wild. And totally, that's definitely the same with films. Absolutely. But yeah, now with technology where you've got phones that are constantly beeping, they're less, films may be less of a bullet unless you're in the cinema. And again, it's completely immersive, you know. I've recently just gone back, I just read the first fantasy book I've read in a while, and I'm obsessed again. I'm obsessed. It had a map in the front, and I love that when you have a map. How great
I love that. There's nothing better than a map in the front of a book. I love it.
It's amazing. And it's a young adult book, and I think there's sometimes people, or at least adults, think, oh, it's a young adult, it's not for me. It's you know, it's young, it's childish. But oh my god, this book was amazing. It was
what is it?
Let me show you. It's called The Gilded Ones, and it's by Namina Fauna. And what I really loved about it, and I don't know whether it's just because I'm reading it as an adult, but there were such adult themes going on here in terms of racism, in terms of feminism and patriarchal societies, that as an adult, because I'm reading about things like that, I can pick up on and I understand.
Yeah.
But it's never mentioned in quite so many words in there. Right. Like, our main character is outcast because she's a different colour skin, because she's slightly different than where she lives. And she's questioning, oh, well, women can't do this and we can't do this and we have to go through ceremonies and this. And she starts to question it, and it's never in so many words, but it's really, I just think it's so clever. And I won't spoil plots because I hate people spoiling plots.
No, absolutely. But yeah, no, I completely,
brilliant.
I bloody love.
Sorry.
No, not at all. I love a book with a map, and that is odd. I think you're right in a way. Like, it seems to be the books with maps are always aimed more at a younger audience, and I think that speaks to, like, you know, maybe we're getting into the deeper questions here, but that speaks to, like, humanity as a whole. Of I fully think that as we get older, we do just like, ooh, great map. I think as we get older, we start to lose that imagination that we have as a kid. Like, my imagination was mental when I was a kid. My mum, well, I say famous, it's not famous, but it's famous in my family. But like, when we were kids, we went on because I grew up in the Highlands of Scotland, which only fueled my imagination as well, because it's literally like living in Middle Earth.
Of course, yeah.
And then we'd, like, you know, go away to the West Coast and you'd see all the islands or wherever. And wherever we went, I'd just pick up a stick and it would be like some sort of weapon or something. And I remember doing it once, and I'd just be bashing trees or whatever. And then my mum, for some reason, started calling me Stagwaz the Brave, and it became a bit of a joke of, like, I was called.
Amazing.
Yeah, and they started, because, like, that means literally like deer piss, Stagwaz. Yeah. So I was called Stagwaz, and it's well funny. Now I say that's a pretty stupid name, isn't it? but that was, Nikki's gone. Sorry, everyone. But that became, and that was my imagination. And I'm kind of like, I don't know. I feel like reading in the last 6 months has almost brought it back. I mean, I like to think I've kept it quite a lot, and I'm still, like, such a closet nerd. I fucking love that stuff. Like, me and Alex Bruce, who you know as well, we will sit there for 2 hours and talk about the political structures of Westeros. But then when it comes to talking about Brexit, I'm like, not interested, mate. I don't know. You know? But I think people think that's stupid. People are like, why bother and all this? And I'm like, well, it seems sad. You know, it comes back to what everyone says of, you know, people die at 25 and are buried at 80. You know, people, like, they just stop being a kid. You just stop having fun. And I think that's the death of a lot of people, isn't it? When you stop having that imagination.
Totally. I think it's really interesting, especially with when we were saying people opening businesses through lockdown. I think for me, certainly, high school and sixth form, while I'll talk very negatively, it was fine at the time. I've got some great people that I still know and still connected. Possibly because it was a girls' school, and I'm not typically girly and pink, if we ignore the pink in the background. I didn't fit that cliche of want to make a fuss, want to do my hair and do all this. So uni, while it was the other end of the spectrum, doing engineering was all guys, it felt it was a time to go, I can be me. I don't have to conform now. And I think actually maybe lockdown's done that for a lot of other people. They've gone, right, let me reassess. I think I can be me. And I think maybe society's just becoming a bit more open to a lot of things. So I think those, you say the inner nerd, I love that as a phrase, because I totally agree. I love that. I think, but it's just getting excited about a specific topic, isn't it? It's
I think so, yeah. And I think you're totally right. You're totally right, as well as, especially, you know, over the last year and things, I think people have realized, like, yeah, fuck it. I really like Star Wars. I'm gonna buy a Star Wars t-shirt and I'm gonna wear it because I don't care. And do you know what I mean? Whereas before they'd have been like, no, I can't. People feel like they have to hide that bit, or like, I put my headphones in when I'm on the tube because I'm actually listening to a book, but I want people to think I'm listening to music, or I don't want to sit with a book. I'd rather, and it is these things, and that may sound really trivial, but I genuinely think there are a lot of people that think that, and it doesn't have to be just reading because that's what we're talking about today. But anything in general.
It's any hobby and passion. Yeah, it's being able to be yourself, and I think society's helping, and we're growing as a world, as a community.
Absolutely.
And that's probably very easy to say as to white people here saying that. We're probably from very similar privileged backgrounds, upbringings, and lots of things like that. But
yeah,
I feel like society is becoming slowly more progressive, that, or maybe it's just with age and we're going, I don't care what you think anymore, I'm going to be me and not.
Well, I think as well, in terms of, going back to like kind of fantasy and closet nerd and all that stuff. One, I think the culture has shifted as well because of things like Game of Thrones and Marvel. Yeah, Marvel. And suddenly it's like, well, Marvel run Hollywood now. It's like every actor wants to be a superhero and stuff. And when I was a kid, that didn't happen really until I was a teenager and the first sort of Batman Begins came out and all that stuff. But things like that, suddenly it's like liking all that stuff is cool. And I'm like, damn, when I was a kid and I was like obsessed with Lord of the Rings and stuff, and like I knew that all the popular kids also loved Lord of the Rings, and they just wouldn't. They were like, oh no, it's all hobbits and that. No, just go play football. And I'm like, you think it's cool, don't you? You just don't want to say it. It was quite funny. Yeah. And I remember me and my friends were like, no, I absolutely love that. It's and I don't know. I'm kind of thankful now that was what I did, and I think it's my mom as well. My mom was always like, just do you, mate. Just don't. She kind of gave me that confidence, I think, to be like, listen to whatever music you want. Go and watch that. If you want to wear a Star Wars t-shirt to school, like wear a Star Wars t-shirt to school. And I was like, okay.
Totally. I'm the exact same. Great support network of parents.
Yeah, I think that
allows you to breathe and be yourself, which is lovely.
Absolutely. In terms of it's really interesting what you said earlier as well about the mental health side of it, with overthinking and things like that. That's definitely something that really resonates with me as well. I have a very busy brain, and unfortunately, it's I think it's something I've learned to do, and something a lot of us have learned to do, is try and live in the present, especially now because it's so difficult to plan anything at the moment. But I think a lot of people are always thinking about 5 or 10 steps ahead of where they actually are. Before they've started a business, they're already thinking, right, well, what am I going to do with the money I make from it? And it's like, right, well, take it back. I quote Tyrion Lannister, one game at a time. something I say. I think I've actually got I've got a rock. My mum wrote it on a rock. Yeah, one game at a time. And that's something big. And like you said, and also, on top of that, finding something that you can do that takes you out of your day for half an hour, anything. And I talk about it a lot, my history with windsurfing and being in that industry, and that very much is that thing for me. And then more recently, Brazilian jiu-jitsu has become that thing for me. But I also think having something, and while there are huge benefits of doing something physical as well, I think having something that isn't physical is also really valuable. Something that you can just completely relax, because otherwise there's a certain pressure attached to a physical activity, isn't there? And if you've got something that you love, like reading, that does take you out of your day, that doesn't require you to go and run around and do stuff for half an hour. Because let's face it, we don't always feel in the mood to do that, do we?
Absolutely.
Like right today, I am not.
Yeah. No, I did the same. So the thing that I found, I knew I've always been a reader, so that's always I've known. I've never quite clicked that it was a brain switch off until probably over lockdown. I didn't realize how much it had helped me. But before lockdown, I salsa dance and I love it. And I found that I did sort of kickboxing as I was younger, but recently I've never been that into sports. But salsa clicked something for me. I love it. It stops me thinking. It stops me overthinking. Because if you think about anything but, you're going to kick yourself, you're going to trip yourself under, you're going to stand on your own toe. My God, it hurts in heels, so, and I love that. But then lockdown, you go, I can't dance anymore.
Yeah.
So totally, I think the physical sort of brain shut off is great and totally brilliant for so many other things. But then actually reading's almost an exercise for your brain if you look at it the other way. You're stretching muscles, you know, there's lots of different things there. And like memory, for instance, your memories from reading, I've seen studies and brilliant things on it, from reading and sort of consistently reading, your memory's getting better. And it's sort of, there's some studies that sort of hint it's putting off Alzheimer's, and we don't have to go into miserable death stats, but putting off the effects of Alzheimer's, because the muscle you're using in your brain, I think muscle, the area in your brain that's remembering things, where every time you close a book, assuming you don't read a book in a go every time, you're having to remember where you left off. And granted, you know, that's going to be hopefully maybe at the end of a chapter, but you've got to remember what happens in the rest of the book. Otherwise you'd have to read it from the start every time. So you're constantly sort of picking out and going back into long-term memory and try, you know, it's interesting from that point of view as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, no, I mean, please go into that if you know. If you,
I mean, that's about it.
No, I mean, but that's like that is such an interesting point, and I think, you know, I swear I've definitely look. There's a reason all of our parents, or you know, most of our parents were like, "Come on, read when you're a kid." You know, there's a reason why we were pushed to read rather than look at screens. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Because I think there's. And I mean, maybe I'm contradicting myself on just saying that, but do you remember when like the Nintendo DS was out and they had that brain training game, and it was all things like that, you know? And I remember my mum was obsessed with it and things. And my mum is a huge reader. She'll go on holiday for 2 weeks and read 24 books. She'll read, you know, it's ridiculous the amount she reads.
She's my kind of woman.
You know, that's like her thing, and she loves it. And she's a big proponent of that. She's like, I think it genuinely does make it, and it makes complete sense. Everything you've said there makes complete sense of like, and it's not like going back, you know, maybe I'm repeating myself, but it's not like watching a TV show or anything like that where you've got a recap at the beginning. Or I think there's a difference between that because it's visual and you're looking at, you know, the actors and whatever doing it, whereas a book you have to kind of make it up in your own brain as well, so you have to plug into that part of your brain as well to go right, what did it all look like in my brain, and now we can carry on reading, you know.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. And then the more you read, the more you're using that muscle, so your memory in other parts of your life gets better. I want to test this and I'm not sure how. My partner's not a big reader. He started and he does little bits, but like not to the extent that I do. And I'm sure I've got a better memory than him. We've grown up similar. We've both done uni, you know, and exams and sort of similar, I'd say similar intelligence for that way. But I swear to fuck, he is useless at remembering where he's put things down. So if anyone can think of some sort of test that I can start doing and testing on it, but honestly, I swear it's true. It's great for memory. It's great for so many other things like that. Yeah.
That's interesting. Really interesting. It kind of I do wonder whether because there's definitely a capacity to our brains, isn't there? So I wonder, you know, what goes. It's always the kind of big things that are put to the fore, but at the same time, there are really strange things. Like when I think back to it now, like I don't really remember Lord of the Rings. Obviously, I know the movies. You know, like I could literally recite every single one right now. But the books, I remember the extra bits that the books did that the films didn't, but I can't remember where I couldn't write you a synopsis now of any of the books and things like that. And it's been, you know, it's been a long time. It's been 10, 13, 14 years since I kind of, you know, since I probably last read them. I would like to read them again, actually. But I'm sure that it's in there somewhere. If I was to sit and really get grilled about it, I reckon it would come up. Do you know what I mean? I think I don't want to say it goes in. I'm very stupid and I could be chatting complete shit here for anyone listening. But you know, I do wonder how much of this information, I suppose, actually ends up in kind of like your subconscious and things like that, especially when it comes to reading those kind of self-help non-fiction books, where that's the kind of book you go, right, I want to take stuff away from this, you know, reading like James Smith's book, or I saw you've got Atomic Habits in the picture you sent me earlier, you know, books like that where you're like, I'm reading this to try and better myself. You know, I do wonder how much of that information is actually retained over the course of however long, or are they like, right, you should read this once a year kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to go back a bit, talking about films and books and how they
always happy to talk about
that. I think that's really interesting, and I want to find something sort of official rather than just what I think. But I think that's really interesting when you read it. When you read the book, you've got this in your head of how these characters look, how your scenery looks, and then the film sort of overrides it. And I don't know why. I don't know whether it's because it's more vivid, because it's more visual, because it's just in your head and you're sort of imagining it rather than physically seeing it in front of you, because it's more vivid maybe. But I totally feel the same. Lord of the Rings I read when I was young. I haven't read them back, and I want to read them back again. I love the films. I think they're brilliant. They are wonderful pieces of art. But and I remember them, and I remember some of the songs. Like I was watching someone's stories, and I remember the songs that are in them, and I go, oh, of course I recognize them. And you go, hold on, they're not in the book. Why on earth do I recognize them? That was 20 years ago I read them, maybe. But yeah, it sort of sparks things. So I'm with you there.
And as well, I wonder,
changes definitely
with fiction as well. I wonder whether, because I'd seen the first film and then I read the books, I'm fairly sure while I was reading them, I was like, Frodo, I know what Frodo Baggins looks like. Or, Aragon, I know exactly what Aragon looks like. So that part of my brain didn't have to, my imagination didn't have to invent that. But at the moment, I'm reading Dune. I don't know if you've read Dune by Frank Herbert. It's like the original sci-fi fantasy book.
Dune, yes, I've heard of it. I've not read it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the film of that is coming out in September. And because I've watched the trailer for that, but when I read it, I don't picture what I've seen in the trailer because I don't think I know enough about it. So it's really exciting because it's not happened to me for a long time where I've read a book and then there's a film about it come out. I don't think that happened since the traumatic experience of watching Aragon when I about 15 years ago. I'm still not over that. That broke my heart.
I'm with you there. I love Aragon. Sometimes the films just butcher it and it's horrible.
Yeah.
And it's because you imagine them and you imagine them, you read this great series that is so captivating. And then you watch it and you go, this is nothing like I imagined. You've messed out this, you messed out this. That was so interesting. He looks nothing like that.
And completely changed it. They butchered it. So there's that. I'm glad you're familiar with that as well. So for me, it's really exciting because at the moment it's exciting, but also like, I will admit, I do find it a bit kind of exhausting sometimes. Like sometimes I'll listen to Dune, and Dune apparently is, it's a bit like Lord of the Rings. It's dense. There's a lot to know and a lot of reading and all this. But I do find myself sometimes I'll get 5 minutes into listening to it, and I'll be like, nope, I'm not listening to this. I can't. Is that something you find as well, or from your sort of followers as well? Do you guys? I know you put a post up the other day saying you completely stopped reading it, and that's something different, but. Sometimes I'm like, I want to give this what it deserves, but I'm like, this isn't the type of escapism I'm looking for right now, if you know what I mean.
So that's something I'd call mood reading, and it's literally picking up what you feel like reading at the time. I tend to flick between fiction and non-fiction, sort of one at a time, or I might have 2 or 3 on the go because it depends on what I want to read and how I'm feeling. If I've had an exhausting day, I do not want to read something that is heavy, in fact something that is absolutely miserable and just grim to read, necessary and want to learn. I'd rather pick up something that's quite easy. That doesn't have to hold so much attention. Like I'll say rom-com, contemporary, something that is, from the start they're going to get together, it's lovely, it's going to have a happy ending. That's going to be easier to consume than perhaps something on psychology where it's talking about the innards of the brain. I think it's mood reading, and that's totally a thing. And that's totally fine.
That's true.
It's totally fine. Do not beat yourself up if you are halfway through your book and you go, well, even just part with your book and you go, I can't concentrate on this. It mustn't be a good book. No, just put it down. Read something else if you want, or don't read something else. Just leave it.
Yeah.
And come back to it. And the same with not finishing books. If there's stuff that if you're not enjoying a book, you're not going to enjoy it anymore by not finishing it. There's no need to beat yourself up. There are so many incredible books out there. Come at me. Go into my DMs and let me help you find something great. Don't beat yourself up. There's books on your bookshelf that have been there for 10, 15, 20, 30, however many years. There's probably a reason you haven't read them yet, because maybe they're not the ones you really want to read.
Yeah. What about you made a really good point. You made a really good point there about going on to that kind of fiction, non-fiction, and I like that. I like what you call it, mood reading. Something I've actually found really difficult, and it's something I've been really vocal about on the podcast as well, and I've been very honest about it, is I don't really listen to any other mental health stuff. because I find it really overwhelming, because I've got my brain and what I think, and I've got my sources that I get my wisdom from, or whatever you'd call it. But even, for example, like, I'm a huge fan of James Smith. Like me and Bruce as well, who's on the podcast as well. I take a lot of inspiration from him and what he's done and the way he lives his life. I really align myself with the way he does it. Of like, stop thinking that you need to buy a house to be successful. Like, just fucking have fun and all that. And I'm like, well, as a man who traveled the world for 10 years and didn't really get paid anything, I completely agree with him. So I love that. But then listening to his audiobook, I listened to it and I'm like, I've still got like half of it to go, and I downloaded it months ago. Because
is this the mental health one, the second one?
Yeah, I didn't read Not a Diet Book, because without, maybe this sounds really cocky, but I don't need to read that one. I'm not on a mega diet. I'm not trying to lose weight or anything. And I felt like that one wasn't for me. But Not a Life Coach felt like, oh, this is something really cool, and it was really good. And I was like, listening to it. But I think Bruce said it perfectly when I was telling him this. He was like, it's just nothing you haven't heard before.
I'm really glad you said that.
Yeah, maybe it is that, but I've struggled with other kind of books like that as well. I just find it a bit overwhelming, and I end up, and this is something really bad that I do, I end up comparing myself to them. I end up being like, oh, James Smith has got a book, why don't I? It ends up almost having the negative effect for me, rather than going, oh, this is a great lesson, I'll take it. I almost find podcasts are more valuable for me finding that, rather than audiobooks, interestingly enough.
That's interesting.
But that's been my experience. Is that something you've come into contact with before? Or what's your experience with that kind of fiction, non-fiction side? We talked about fiction a lot.
Yeah, so I'll comment on the James Smith stuff, because I was part of his academy. I think I'd liked what he talked about a lot. He's got a very no bullshit stance on a lot of stuff, which for a lot of people is very different than what they've been than what they've heard before. Exposed, that's the word. So there's a big pull to him for a lot of people, and that's great. He also says some funny stuff every now and again. You go, oh no, you're fine. You understand where he comes from, but to an extent, so I don't disagree with him with that. I read Not a Diet Book. For me, that was nothing new, because I'd followed him for a little while, and I'd sort of learned that going through anyway. But as a book, very accessible for someone that's learning new. Great, fine. It's not the biggest piece of science out there. It's not the biggest dive, but it's cutthroat. It's to the point. This is that. With Not a Life Coach, I felt the exact same, that it's nothing new. It very much touches on lots of different things, but doesn't delve into them anywhere near enough. And I questioned whether it's just because I've been reading more about lots of these different things that it just wasn't enough. It was a very good overview, but it's like you mentioned one thing and you're like, oh, I'd love to know more about that, but there's like a paragraph and that's it kind of thing. It moves on, which is fine, because maybe that's what he wanted to do with it. It was an overview to go, look, there's lots of things here, take what you need from it. But it wasn't enough for me, to be honest.
I think to be honest, sorry Nikki, I think for you as one of, you said you were part of the academy, obviously you're very familiar with it as well. Myself, I think I feel like an arsehole every time I say this, but like the way I've lived my life for the last 10 years, doing seasons and all that stuff, I didn't feel I needed the wisdom he was giving there of quit your doing and follow your passion, all this. And I'm like, well, I've kind of, that's what I've been doing, and then quitting my job and all that stuff. I'm like, and Bruce summed it up perfectly. He was like, this book isn't, he just said, he was like, it's nothing, we don't need to hear it really. It's not designed for us.
It's not for you. You're not the target audience, which is fine. And there's going to be so many things that are like that, and that's totally fine. You read it, you go, not for me. Fine. Yeah. In terms of the other part, sorry. So totally agree with that. There are some books that you'll read and you just go, I don't get the hype around it. But it's probably because it's not for you, and that's totally fine. But when authors write books, they're going to have a target audience. Your rom-com's just been incredibly sexist. They're probably more veered towards women, because that's what we know women like to read a lot of. I think that's fine. And like Not a Diet Book was aimed at people, not necessarily men or women there, but people that had been fed a lot of misinformation. Fed is a good word there. Fed a lot of misinformation, and maybe the second one was more for his followers that wanted a bit more of that. I don't know. So I feel the same with that. It wasn't for me. It wasn't enough. But in terms of overwhelming and mental health stuff. I think it's really interesting to say about that, because I think when I was trying to find books that focus, and especially fiction, actually, I know you've asked about non-fiction, but especially fiction that focus on mental health, I think it can be overwhelming to read a book that is just on mental health, because it's quite an experience. It's quite, I say traumatic, that might sound a bit
no, but it's true. It is.
But it's quite, because you involve yourself in that book, because you live that character's life, it's quite traumatic. You take the empathy you get, and that's another study how great reading is for empathy, but you take on their emotions, and that's a heavy read, certainly, you know. So I think that's quite demanding, and especially if it's the end of the day, you've had a hard day at work or with whatever, that's not something that you're going to want to pick up. You know, you don't need that on top of everything else telling you this is it. In terms of comparison, yeah, totally agree. It's so easy to compare yourself to, this is how you do this, and this is how, you know, this is your perfect life, Atomic Habits, this is how you do this, and this, which is fine and it's good. You know, Atomic Habits is a great book for sure, but life's a bit messier, you know. And I think with a lot of things like that, you have to take them with a pinch of salt, because you can spiral, and it can make your mental health worse, because you go, oh, this is too much. There is, you know, there isn't one solution for everyone. Mental health hits us all differently, doesn't it? You know, and for different reasons. So there's reading books about it. Definitely, you know, it might help. You might not take everything, but there might be a couple of sentences or a paragraph that go, aha, okay, that might help me, or I understand why I'm doing this, and there might be some small takeaways, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You couldn't, I couldn't have said it any better myself as well. You know, that's why I think perhaps I don't, maybe that's why I find, you know, books quite difficult. At the end of the day, it's not like they can write a book for everyone, is it? You know, it's not a personal book just for you. And it's great that some people pick it up and it resonates and they go, oh my God, I feel like this has been written for me. But I do wonder if, you know, for these kind of non-fiction self-help, this book will save your life kind of thing. I do wonder how many people
marketing ploy.
Well, for every person that reads it that goes, oh, I love this is exactly what I needed. I wonder if there are other people a bit like myself, or, you know, that kind of read it and go, this is, you know, you read it and it's good, and I recognize that there's some good lessons in it, but at the same time you're like, oh, this is a bit overwhelming. I'm like, I'm just trying to figure stuff out. It goes back to what I say about one game at a time. You read that, for me, it's just complete overload of information. And you go,
absolutely,
I'm not sure how much of this is actually like for me.
Yeah, totally. And that's absolutely the thing with nonfiction, isn't it? It's they're maybe perceived as more educational content. And overload of facts and constant intake. And definitely some books are like that. Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep, is hard science. My God, that takes a while to get through. It's a great book. It's so interesting, but it is heavy and it just takes time to get through it. Whereas nonfiction that's also perhaps a memoir, it's slightly different. It's slightly easier to consume. So there's, totally. I think I've forgotten what the original question was. But nonfiction, they can definitely be quite, scary and overwhelming if they are just thunderous amounts of facts and hard facts and nothing there, definitely.
What are your, something I was really, really wanting to ask you about actually for this podcast is what are your thoughts about, you know, in the last year and things, reading has had a bit of a resurgence, I think. I don't know whether it's just because I'm kind of involved, you know, because I've got the podcast and I'm kind of in that mental health space. So maybe I'm just more aware of it, if you know what I mean. Maybe my spotlight is shining on that side at the moment.
It's in your echo chamber,
But that's the best word for it. That's the one. You know, maybe that's why. But I do feel like reading in general, suddenly everyone's doing it, and particularly that non-fiction, everyone, and maybe it's like, you know, maybe it's partly not my fault because I don't have that much of an influence, but, you know, being another mental health podcast that everyone else does, you know, of having people on and talking about learning lessons and better in your life and all that stuff. I wonder what you think about, firstly, about is reading having a resurgence, and secondly, do you think that is positive or negative given everything we've just talked about, when it, you know, given that suddenly people feel they're like, oh, I want to read, but they feel pressure to read a non-fiction book or something like that, rather than go, I just really want to read a book about dragons, you know.
I'm really glad you asked that. So let me do the resurgent thing first. So I think I think lockdowns helped. I think lockdown forced people to slow down, and I think lockdown gave, especially those that were unfortunate enough to lose jobs or were furloughed, gave people a lot more time that they almost didn't know what to do with. And reading is something, if you've got, for example, books on your shelf, is relatively accessible. Audio books are brilliant because as we only had one walk a day, you could listen to an audiobook on your walk. So I think that's helped a lot. So I think lockdown started a lot of people reading again for lack of anything else to do. You know, that slowing down sort of reminds them, oh yeah, I do quite like reading actually. Maybe I can do this for my time. I think over the past couple of years, independent bookshops have bloomed. People stopped wanting to buy from Amazon and want to support local communities. So I think that's had a big impact. I always find it really interesting that when Kindle came out and e-readers came out, everyone thought the books were going to die out, but it's not the case. Book sales are just keep increasing or steadily increasing. They're not going down at all, which I think is brilliant.
There's something
off the environment, but you know, there's something so much. It's holding a physical
really
book.
nice about holding a book, isn't there? There's something.
Totally. So I think there's not wanting to buy from giants that you can't see in your community. I think that's had a help. Holding a physical book is so much. There's so much emotion attached to it. You know, e-readers are great for holiday if you're going to read 20 books and it's easy. So I can't bash them for that, but I absolutely need a physical book. I need to smell it. I need to feel it. I need to throw it across the room where it's upset me, you know. So yeah, I think lockdown has helped. I think the rise of the high street, that, you know, high streets are closing down, but I think they're coming back. And libraries, let's mention libraries, because they are incredible resources. And maybe it was just my view as growing up, they were sort of dingy old places when I was younger, but they are some of the things they have on nowadays with talks and such amazing ranges of books, and they're so accessible to a lot more people. So it's such a privilege to be able to buy and read as I do, and I'm well aware of that. So let's just shout to libraries as well. You know, there's lots of things like that I think have helped people. I think lockdown was the big one, especially this last year, and maybe part of that not being afraid to be yourself and going, I like reading, I'm going to do it. 50 Shades of Grey definitely helped a lot of older women go, I like reading about sex, and that is totally fine. You know, I'm not ashamed about this, which is brilliant, because 50 Shades of Grey, that's another story for another day. But, you know, people being less concerned with what they're going to be judged. Oh, people being judged less, I guess, or feeling like they're going to be judged less. So I think that's all. Get into it. But in terms of the fiction and non-fiction, I think there's a huge, I think there's a lot of people that read both. Don't get me wrong, but then there's a lot of people that are stuck in one camp, either fiction or non-fiction. The people that are stuck in non-fiction, perhaps, and I might be assuming a lot here, maybe haven't read as when they were younger, so maybe didn't, or maybe did, but not to the same extent that a lot that people did and really loved reading. But so now they feel like they want to start reading because it's a good thing and they know it's good for them, and actually you can learn a lot. And I think people miss education every now and again, and I think non-fiction does that. You can learn, and it's at your own pace. So I think that people in non-fiction go, oh, well, I want to be learning. There's no point to reading if I'm not learning. But then actually the lessons you learn from fiction are huge. Like empathy is a huge one. Empathy is, I'll bang on about this. The amount of empathy you learn from reading fiction, from being in someone's shoes, from experiencing what they've gone through is massive. You know, you really are pulled straight into that world, into that character's feelings. So yeah, I there's arguments for both sides. I think non-fiction readers pick up a fiction once in a while. You still will learn things. It's not quite as obvious. It's not pointed out to you in bold bullet points, this, and this, but you'll learn so much. And I think that really helps with development. And I don't just mean as a, you know, from young people's age and children's age. I think you can still develop them things now. You know, empathy is so great for relationships, for listening to people, you know. So yeah, I think non-fiction people need to read some fiction. And I think people that are sat in the fiction camp because they don't want to read non-fiction ever because it is just education and it's scary. There's a lovely crossover in between, that it's not so scary non-fiction.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm here to do. But yeah, I think there's definitely a bit of, I don't know if stigma is the right word, but there's definitely two camps, you know, and there's people in between by all means, but there's people that will not read fiction because they feel like they have to learn something, and that's just a bit miserable, feeling you have to do something because of judgment because of whatever. And yeah, maybe there is still a bit of judgment around reading fantasy and, oh, that's a bit childish, isn't it? On to make up. But then you go, no, look at Game of Thrones. That took off massively.
Yeah.
You know, and that's like, I haven't read it yet. I'm so sorry. I haven't read it. It's on my shelf. They're on my shelf. They're on my shelf to read. But you know, that's just proving that people can read what they want. And yeah, and 50 Shades, maybe that's another good example. But,
well, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. You know, I think it's just, you know, people at the end of the day, people just need to have the confidence to read whatever they want. And if they're not, yes. I think what I've taken from everything you've said over the last hour, it's that it's okay to, like, if you're not enjoying it, just stop. Like, because I fully like, I think maybe it's because of the position I'm in with this podcast and all that. I feel like as a mental health advocate or whatever you'd call me, or you know, anything like that, I feel like I should be like, well, these are some books I would recommend. I've got Atomic Habits, and this one's fantastic, and this one's great. And I don't have, if anyone's like, what do you listen to and all this? I'm like, well, I really like listening to Joe Rogan, and then I listen to a lot of podcasts about movies, and then I read a lot of books about dragons and spaceships. And then, you know, it's like, well, but I'm like, for me, that's what works for me. When I go for a walk, totally. I want to listen to podcasts about films. As I said, I love listening to Joe Rogan. I think, I don't know, I've just taken a lot of lessons from him in the last year and a half, and yeah, I resonate a lot with his conversations, and I love it. But again, he does a funny one as well, because he talks about mental health without ever talking about mental health. He has such a wide variety of people on and things like that. And I think that's something that I've really started trying to emulate with the podcast. So I'm very sorry, we go completely off subject here.
It's fine, totally.
But it's something I've tried to emulate a lot as well, because as you said earlier as well, with books about mental health, sometimes they can be super heavy, and to the point where actually they're no longer, because even educational content has to be entertaining, especially if you're doing it yourself. If you're sitting in school or university, you're like, well, I'm getting this education for a reason, so that I can get a job or, you know, get a career or a qualification. But if you're like opting to read a book that's going to be educational
again, isn't it? Yeah,
it has to be. Yeah, it has to be entertaining. You have to be like, this is good, I'm going to keep reading this. If it's just like just mental health, this is what happens, and this is what makes people feel shit, and this, it'll be educational and interesting to a certain point, and you're like, this is cool, and then you're like, fuck me, I'm bored.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Totally. And I think that's totally why there's such a big movement. I mean, one thing I try and do in my boxes is try and keep both the books and the products as diverse and inclusive as possible, because I think, and I've gone off slightly, but there's a reason. My bookshelf used to be so white, and it used to be mostly male white authors, which is what publishing is, and it's getting better, but that's what it was. And so that, you know, lots of things happened over the last year, which made a lot of people wake up to a lot of injustices in the world. Injustices? Oh gosh. Yeah. In the world. So there's a huge thing about reading about Black joy. So not just reading books about Black people, Indigenous people that are miserable and traumatic and just grim, that constantly talk about the horrible, horrifying things that have happened to history, but reading about Black joy, as in rom-coms that have representation of women of colour that are happy, because great things do happen to lots of different people. So I think there's such a push for that, and I think that's been really interesting to watch. And not just Black joy, but sort of every marginalized voice you can say. It's not, don't just read, I'm going a bit social justice, sorry.
Yeah, no, I know what you
don't
mean.
just read the things that are traumatic, because that is, it's heart-wrenching. I am absolutely a crier when it comes to books, and I cry at most books I read because I get that into it, and maybe that's just me being ridiculous, but it affects some books affect you so much. So if you're constantly reading books that are about horrible topics, and not to say that they're not necessary, because absolutely, to forward ourselves as society, we need to learn, we need to make sure history doesn't repeat itself, that kind of thing, sure, but read some happy shit in between. You know, there's nothing, it's almost like my I keep saying it, my rom-coms are my go-tos, because, and I don't care that when you start the book, you know these characters are going to get together, and that's lovely, but almost knowing that, it doesn't take the excitement away. It's just, you know, it's going to be a happy book. There's going to be a twist somewhere in the middle. There's going to be some great sex, and then that's it. They're going to end happy, and that's lovely. And sometimes you need to know that it's going to end well. I think you need that joy in books as well. And especially, if you're reading constant after constant, which might just be, if you're reading non-fiction after non-fiction, which doesn't have a happy ending or have something joyful, get you excited to do something, to learn more, or, you know, whatever, that's quite a miserable state to be in. And that's not going to make you want to read more, perhaps. That's going to go, oh, well, I don't want to read anymore. But there's so much more out there. You know, I think reading something that you genuinely love is so important. So important.
Yeah. Well, couldn't think of a better place to kind of start rounding this up on than that. Quickly though, Nikki, as you said, you know, you kind of do these boxes. Can you just do? Usually, I kind of ask people like what they've been watching and all this stuff, but because it's quite specific with you. I feel like there's a better question. Can you just give us a couple of recommendations of what you've been reading recently? So do a couple of non-fiction, a couple of fiction. Yeah, hit me, and the readers, the listeners, with what you've been reading.
Okay. So I'm going to mention The Gilded Ones again, because that has just absolutely blown my mind. It's young adult, it's fantasy, it's very much about a patriarchal society, but that she's so indoctrinated in, and about halfway through she starts to question it. But it's about the demons and sacrifices and lots, and oh my god, that's
cool.
Well, speechless. That one, absolutely. It's, when I'm talking about feminism, I'm not saying this is just for women. This is so important for guys to read as well. So it sucks you in. It's great. I don't want to say any more than that because I hate spoiling it. Gilded Ones.
Don't.
Easy read. You'll dash through it, and she's got another one coming out next year. So there's a fiction. What else have I read recently? Here's one that's a bit different. It's called The Black Flamingo, and it's by Dean Atter. It's about a young queer black boy who you sort of follow him from the age of sort of 2 and 3, as you know, as you start to sort of develop conscious thoughts, up until he goes into university, and he faces racism, he faces homophobia, and lots of other sort of different traumas along the way. But it's written in prose, which is really interesting. And when I say that, it's not rhyming every line, but there's a rhythm to it. And I appreciate we're over voice and not over video here, but it's not full pages of text there, and there's a rhythm to it. It's sort of, you keep reading and you keep reading because you're going bam 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 bam, and
that's cool.
It's really interesting. I really enjoyed that, and that's, without doing a plug, that's why I put it in one of the boxes, because that was just so good. The rom-com side of things, which absolutely is not just a female thing. I'll say it again, there are guys that love rom-com and will refuse to talk about it and say it. It's so okay to read contemporary romance. If that's what you like to read, do it, and do it proud, because it's great. Talia Hibbert's Brown Sisters series, there's 3 books in there. They're all sisters. You don't have to read them all at once. They are brilliant for fiction, just totally consumable, addictive, absolutely in love with the characters. That one was great. What else? Now I'm gonna have to say, I took pictures of my bookshelves because I knew I'd go absolutely blank.
I'd ask you this. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I did.
No, just give it. Yeah, and then what sort of given that it's been quite a big topic of the conversation, what is a non-fiction book, like one of these kind of self-help books? What's one that you've read that's actually really helped you?
So that's really helped me, and it's really an easy one as well. Well, no, I'll go with 2 actually, and hopefully they're both by 2 white authors. But one of them is called Who Moved My Cheese, and it's a tiny little book, but it's about overcoming change and getting used to change. I'm quite a stubborn person, and when I plan things are going to happen to the plan, because that's how I work. And it's really easy. That how many did? There's less than 100 pages in it. But it's dealing with change in work life and other life as well. And I thought that was just a completely different perspective. So that I think is interesting. In terms of mental health, I really loved Matt Haig's Notes on a Nervous Planet. I really resonated with that. If you've not been a non-fiction reader, it's quite accessible in that it's a small book, but it's short chapters, and some of them are sort of more thoughts and lists on a page rather than anything else. And I didn't read it right when it came out. I've only recently discovered Matt Haig a couple of years ago, but there's a lot of things anxiety-wise that resonated with me, and I thought that was really good. And then I'll do one more. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Matt Haig is the king of anxious people, in my opinion. The man should be president. He's
he's a good man.
Yeah.
The other one, it's a bit of an odd one. It's called What a Time to Be Alone. And it's by someone called The Sunflower on Instagram. You might have heard of it. Or she's Chidera Egeru. And it's a lot about self-confidence, sort of owning yourself and saying, I am worth this, I can do this. It's not about being single, why I didn't read it for ages. I'm in a very happy relationship, John, if you're listening. But yeah, it's so much about self-assurance. And again, as a non-fiction, it's totally not overwhelming because you've got great graphics, you've got not full
nice
text, that kind of thing. And it's just, that one is probably more tailored towards women, but there's absolutely not a thing that you couldn't read as a man. It's totally about owning yourself and being worthy of love and being worthy of that kind of thing. And I really liked that as well. And then I'll do one last one. I've read We've Always Been Here, which is a memoir of a queer Muslim woman called Samra Habib, which is really interesting. I felt like it was fiction, and it absolutely isn't, because it's someone's life, and that sounds a bit funny to say, but she's a queer woman who grew up in Pakistan and immigrated to, oh God, I can't remember whether it's North America or Canada now. I think it's Canada. That's awful. It's either one. She immigrated across the world to escape, with her family, to escape horrible things happening. And the Muslim community isn't terribly happy about queer people. So she's got this constant fight, and you sort of see hints of it from when she's a young age. It sort of follows her as she grows up. And it's really interesting to see that internal discussion and that she has with herself, that she has with her family, that she has with her sexuality. She sort of figures out who she is, I guess.
Yeah.
But exploring so many themes. There's religion, there's sexuality, there's race, there's so many themes in there. And it's just, again, it's such a small book, which I quite like when they're small and they're not overwhelming.
Yeah, that's something that turns me off straight away, unless it's got dragons in it.
Game of Thrones. Yeah, exactly. I feel the same. I'm a big reader. I love reading, but big books, Sapiens, I've not read because the size of it
is huge. Yeah, I've not done it either.
And books that have tiny writing as well. Yeah, total turn off. Bought them because I know I need to read them and I want to read them, but it's overwhelming. So read something you like, read something that doesn't feel terrifying to read. But yeah. Is that a few? Sorry, I've gone on a bit there.
No, that's fine. No, it's good. It's one of those things where it's like, it's so cool to see, like, you are obviously so passionate about this. So it's like, it's really cool. Firstly, it's always cool to talk to someone who's so passionate about what you're talking to them about. And then secondly, it's even cooler to know that they're like doing something with it, you know? So with that in mind, where can we find you? Where can people find, if people are interested in doing your book boxes, or just following you on Instagram? You do a lot of, you're very active. You do a lot of like Instagram lives, talking to people, not just about books, but about all the issues you've spoken about. Where can people find more about you and kind of sign up for all that sort of stuff?
So I'm on Instagram as the Bookish Mindset. That's probably where I'm most active. And if you want recommendations or help with anything, or just thoughts on a book or something, DM me on there. That's probably the easiest, quickest way. I'm also on Facebook as the Bookish Mindset. There's a page on there. Twitter, I'm on there, but as Bookish Mindset, because the bookish bit doesn't fit. Then I'm on TikTok, but I definitely think I'm too old for it.
Yeah, mate.
There as well. No, got away from that. And then the website's thebookishmindset.com as well. But yeah, come have a look at the website, sign up to my emails. I do weekly email, and I won't spam you, just chat shit about what I'm reading. Yeah.
That's what we like here. Chat and shit is what we like here at the After Hours. Well, yeah, I mean, Nikki, thank you so much for coming on. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much too.
I hope you guys listening have enjoyed as well. Hopefully you guys can take some lessons from what Nikki has talked about. If you are a bit nervous about reading, or if you want to get into reading, but you're kind of, unsure of where to start, whether it's fiction, non-fiction. But ultimately, the big thing to take away is just don't be ashamed. If you want to read a book about dragons, read a book about dragons. If you want to read a book about people shagging each other, read a book about people shagging each other. If you want to read a book about anything, read it. As well. And if you're ashamed of it, get the audiobook and no one knows. They think you're listening to Ed Sheeran, Or
swap your covers around. If you're in hardback, swap.
See, this is the inside insight that we're getting.
Or ebooks as well. Yeah.
Exactly. You can easily hide it. You can also find me on Instagram, guys, on at the After Hours Lounge. If you go to the link in my bio there, you will be able to listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more recently, YouTube. I am now putting videos of all the episodes up on my newly created YouTube channel, so you can watch there. And also via the link in my bio, you can also donate to the podcast. As I've said, all this talking is thirsty work. And whilst I'm in this for the outcome, not the income, a bit of income always helps. Thank you so much again to Nikki. Thank you to you guys for listening. And we will see you for the next one.